All right, tonight's webcast is going to be on text wrap, and I think this is going to be really fun. I think it'll take everybody to the next step in their creative efforts to create exciting layouts. Text wrap deals with the area where we have stacked blocks of text and graphics that need to interact, and we want the text to move away from the images. So if I just demonstrate this with this spread, I've got 4 different images here. One is wrapping around a text frame. So even though this is something that we call often a pull quote, it's created with a text frame that has a fill and that has text, and then I have used the text frame options to move that text away from its edges. I can still use this as an object to force the outside text to move around. The one below it is an example of where we wrap around the bounding box of an image. And in this case, that makes a lot of sense because the image is a square, not a square, it's a rectangular image. So I don't really have the need for that text to come in and wrap around any particular part of this. And that would be difficult to do anyway, since that's not really what InDesign is programmed to do. We will talk about the case where you want to place a small byline or some sort of description with the image, and we need to do one extra step to get that to work with the text wrap. Moving over here to the right spread, I have just a simple circular shape, but you can see that in this case we're talking about wrapping text around the contour or the path of the shape. And last but not least, we have an example, and let me go here and increase my display performance just for a moment to maybe I can sharpen that image up. Yeah, that's much better. This is an example of a contour wrap, but it's wrapping around the outer edges of a vector graphic. So this is not rasterized. This is a vector graphic, which is very easy for InDesign to figure out where those edges are, because despite the fact that this and this circle are not rectangles, notice that they still have a rectangular bounding box, which you guys know because we've mentioned this several times going through our webcast. So I'm going to repeat how I created each one of these on the following spread, and we'll go through the details of how we set this up, what are some of the things we have to look out for, and then I will also show a demonstration of each of the 2 homework files that I sent out, actually the 2 pages of the lab, which one of them is this one. That was one of the samples that was included in the instructions. That's the first page, and then this was the second page. So what I've done is I've added a second page to the right so I can go through some of those steps and hopefully clarify any questions anyone has or any confusion that anyone has from looking at those instruction sheets. All right, I'm going to move down to this next spread. You can see that it's just 2 pages pretty much set solid with text. And I'm going to get out of preview mode and zoom out just a little bit. And you can see that I have several images that I brought in, including the ones that were on the previous spread, and then I've added a couple of others to show some of the different features of the text wrap. All right. Obviously, if we place an image on the page, let's say that I just place this one here, and I zoom in. This image is sitting right on top of this text, and it is not pushing that text out of the way. In order for text wrap to function, we need, as a beginner, we want that image to sit on top of the text block. That's when it's going to work the best. You can modify some of your settings to let it sit behind, but for the most part we want that text to sit behind the image so that the image forces the text out of the way. On our control panel, we have 4 buttons here when you have your selection tool highlighted. And these are the different types of text wrap options that are available. It's not the full set though. For example, this one is no text wrap. That's always the default. The one to the right is to wrap around a bounding box and then wrap around object shape and to jump over an object. But if you want all of the options available, you need to go to the window menu, because remember, the window menu is the home of all of our panels. So whenever you need a panel, this is the place you're going to go to try to find it. The text wrap you might assume would be under the submenu of Type and Tables. It's on the top level of this menu, and it's just called text wrap. I have it docked over here on the right, which is why it popped out over here instead of coming up in the center of my page. And I can see that there are these same icons appearing here that I see up above here. But we have far more options listed in the text wrap box or panel. When you create a text wrap, you are adding a text wrap to the shape that you want the text to wrap around. You are not adding text wrap to the text box. I have a lot of students who assume that they select the text box and that they apply the text wrap to that. And all that would do is push any text that was sitting next to it out of its way. So that's the first main point of text wrap. Be sure that you are adding the text wrap attributes to the object that you want the text to run around. When you turn on text wrap, which would be any of these icons other than the first one, immediately there's going to be a, I don't know what you want to call it, a force field that's going to appear around the edge, and that's going to push the text out of the way. By default, when you use text wrap for the first time, you normally see the chain link set as linking all 4 boxes, and you normally see the wrap set to 0. And it's just because I play with text wrap a lot and I use it a lot in my work that we're seeing some different attribute settings than are typically there. The 4 boxes that we see wrapped around this little chain link is wrap above the object and below, so top and bottom offset, and then wrap to the left and the right offset of the object. And in this case, because I have wrap around bounding box selected, that is what the wrap is going to follow. And you see we have this dotted line that goes all the way around, which is my bounding box at the moment. I'm just going to increase this slightly by clicking on the up arrow to the left of the field. Notice that each time I click, I'm just increasing it by 1 point. And because the chain link is selected, all 4 fields are increasing by the same amount of space. My experience has shown me that that's not usually what I want. For example, there was plenty of room for this line of type to fit above this image, but because I increased the same text wrap attributes to all 4 fields, it's really pushing up too far, and it's pushing this text out of the way. So you always have to fudge things just a little bit to get them to look visually in line and pleasing. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to disconnect my chain link so that I can independently change the settings for top, bottom, left, and right. And I'm going to get rid of that top option. And I'm probably still not real happy with that because I think it sits too high above this line of type. So I'm going to use my arrow key to just nudge it down a little bit so I feel like I have a consistent amount of white space around this. And I also have a little bit of a problem underneath. I'm not sure if that line of type is going to fit, and if it does, is it going to come too close to my byline here? This is from an Adobe Classroom in a book. So I'm going to remove the bottom spacing, and it's not enough. This text line is not going to fit. so I look at this and I think, okay, I'm not real happy with that because I don't like the amount of space I see below as compared to what I'm seeing across the top. I also see that I've got punctuation moving into this wrap. So I'm going to increase the left wrap a little bit more to at least, let's say, 7 points, and I'm going to do the same for the right. You'll constantly need to go into preview mode so that you don't see those lines and that little force field, because you can't get a real good sense of how this image is impacting your page. And of course, I've got it going right through the middle of the heading, which is completely unacceptable. So let's just drag this image up. Let's see if I can find a more appropriate place for it here. And deselect by clicking off into my pasteboard area, and that's probably much better. Okay, let me zoom out a little bit, go back into normal mode, and I'm going to bring in this text box, which is a pull quote. In fact, I think what I'm going to do is move this one down here, which is probably where it was better placed. Even though this is a text box, the rules for a bounding box are going to exist in a fairly similar way as what we just did down here. So this will just be a quick little review. Actually, I'm going to move this one up here to the corner, and I'm going to drag this one down more here so we have a better view of what's going on. The inner box that you are seeing isn't the text wrap. This is the frame command that allows me to force white space or to force a space away from the edge of that frame. And if anybody doesn't remember that, I can right click and I can go to my text frame options, which came up over here on my other monitor. And I can see that for this text box, I set the inset spacing to 8 points. And I did that all the way around, top, bottom, left, and right. And that's why this text cannot come any closer than 8 points to the edge of the text frame. As I've mentioned before, this is one of the most valuable commands in InDesign because it allows me to put the background in the same text box that is holding the type. We used to have to draw a box behind, give it a background color, put another text box on top of it, make sure that they were grouped, and then of course the moment you made any changes to the type, you had to redo the background. So this was a wonderful advantage once we were able to incorporate both of these functions into the same text box. I'm going to click on Wraparound Bounding Box again in my text wrap panel. And it's remembering what I had before, unfortunately, so I'm not starting from scratch here. You can see that the bottom, I even put a negative because it was pushing the line below it. I'm sure when I was playing around with this, it was pushing the line below it out. So this is something else you can do. Let me put this back at 0. And it's actually behaving pretty well. But let's say that something like this happened. Just close enough where it's interfering with the line spacing of this line that starts with invisible. So visually it may fit, but InDesign is not allowing it to. And this is where you can go in and change the wrap to a negative number. So I'm going to change, in fact all I needed to do is make it a -1, and you can see that that line just jumped right up and ran underneath it. This actually should go up a little bit, and that looks much better. And I have a wrap on the right of 6 points, which I would normally say, unless you have a special situation, I would say always make it at least 6 points. That would be my minimum. And now that I am looking at this without it selected, I think it could come up just a little bit more. The other thing you might need to do too is adjust the height of a particular image so that it fits better in the wrap. A couple things I'm not happy about with this wrap. First of all, I don't like that it's a little bit below the ascender, and if I adjust that, then it's really not aligning properly down here with this word then. I would really rather have this text box go about like this. And this is very common with text wrap. You're putting it into a particular situation where you have a set line spacing or leading and type size, and it's just not working. And you have the option sometimes of being able to change your image or the text box that you're wrapping around. And here's another thing I'm not real thrilled about. I don't like that there's only one line that this is pushing down into that second paragraph. If this was all one paragraph, I think I'd feel better about it, but I see that there's a little bit of a paragraph break here, and this to me looks a little bit too much like a widow-orphan situation. So, and I'm not going to sit here and monkey with this, but you can get a feeling for how much time you have to put into this sometimes to get it to look just the way you want it to. All right, let's move over here and talk about moving to the next option in text wrap, which is wrap around the object shape. I'm so excited. Confer is finally allowing my tooltips to come up. I'm noticing that they're coming up on my second monitor, and they don't even work on my first monitor usually, so this is wonderful. All right, I'm just going to take this circle, and all I did was go over to the object ellipse tool, and I just drew a circle and filled it with this pink color. I'm going to move it down into the area of the text, and you can see that it is covering up the text. It's obviously not wrapping. I'm going to click on the second icon, and immediately it wraps around the edge. Here's a major difference. When you are wrapping around the contour, around the shape, notice that if that shape is not a rectangle, you lose 3 of the 4 fields. Instead, InDesign only allows you to choose one distance. And this will be the distance that follows the object all the way around. Which makes sense, because at what point would be the left, the top, the right, and the bottom? So it makes sense that it's saying, listen, I can give you a certain distance from all edges of this object. If I change this to my wrap to option to both right and left, this is going to allow me to move this into the center, and the text will wrap both through the left and the right areas. But what happens if I get just a little closer? That looks pretty bad. We definitely don't want this sneaking in over here on the right. And sometimes this happens. Let's say you had a person and their arm was sticking out. Sometimes you get text that jumps in underneath that little area. If you can visualize an arm raised or sticking out and you have that area that's created, that gap under the arm between that and the body. And this is where the text often wants to try to jump over. So you need to change your wrap option to accommodate that. And there are several things that you can do. You have only wrap on the right side, only wrap on the left side. And let's see what happens with that one. The left side works. But I can also choose side towards spine and side away from spine. This is completely irrelevant if you don't have a 2-page spread, because remember, the spine is the connection between a right and a left page. InDesign has several features that let you take advantage of this. You have options that allow objects to be anchored on the outside of the page. And if that page that was on a right side ends up becoming a left page, it will jump over to the other side of the page automatically without you having to make any adjustments to the layout. And we'll get into this more when we start talking about anchored images. So for now, I'm just going to ignore the spine options, but just in the future, if this is something that's important to you because you're working on a 2-page spread, this is something you might want to take advantage of. Another option that comes in really handy when sometimes right and left fail, because it just doesn't quite suit the need, is largest area. So if this is pushed over here more to where I have a larger area versus a smaller area, it's going to take the largest area and then it will keep the text from going beyond or going into this smaller area. All right, so here is around a shape. Pretty easy. All right, now let's go to wrapping around a shape. And one of the easiest ones here is a vector shape. And I think you guys can see from the look of this graphic that it is definitely not an image where it's a photograph or it's rasterized. And if I zoom way in on one of these flowers, you can see that in fact these are very nice clean lines. There are no pixels involved in this, so this is definitely a vector image. I'll drag this onto my page, go to my text wrap options, and choose that I want to wrap around the object shape. And here's why I have a perfect example of it just jumping right out of the way. I've got 10 points. I might move that down just a little. This is getting a little close right here to the left of this yellow bud, but for the most part I'm pretty happy with this except for this text again sneaking in behind. And I can't move it too much further over to the right because if I do, it's going to go into my margin area, which as you can see I have done that with the circle, but I don't want this image to go too far into my margin in case I lose some of that. So I'm definitely going to have to change my wrap to options, and I'm going to say, how about largest area? Again, this would have been perfect, but I don't like how this single line is wrapping up across the top. So in this case, what I might do is increase the size of this image just a little bit or decrease it in order to get 2 lines of type. Maybe I would try both. So I'm holding down my Shift key and my Control key, or on the Mac it would be my Shift key and my Command key. As you'll remember, that will size my frame and my image. Because if I just try to expand my frame, remember the image stays the same. So let me hold down both of those keys, drag just a little bit. That will cut off that top line. I'll go into preview mode, and I really get the wrap that I'm looking to achieve. But if this image ended up being too large for my page layout, maybe I'd want to go the other way around. Hold down those keys again, put my cursor in the top left corner so that I can size both vertically and horizontally at the same time. Drag until I see at least 2 lines of type. The industry standard for widow and orphan control, and I will get into this more into text, and that means that you have either a line left at the beginning or a line left at the end. The industry standard is 2 lines. Typically the higher quality the publication or the smaller the publication, that increases to maybe 3 lines. In a technical manual, it's typically 2 lines because you're trying to get as much copy on the page as possible. These rules also apply to how many words are left at the end of the line. If parentheses had been sitting there by itself or it had been a shorter word, I probably would have forced another word from the previous line down. So I'm much happier with this with 2 lines if I needed to bring the size of this image down a little bit. I'm going to move back over here to the left page, and I'm going to go back to normal view because I've got some other examples here that I want to bring on the page. This little toy is a rasterized image even though it looks pretty darn clean, but if we get close, you can definitely see this is a rasterized image. And it has a white background, but in Photoshop, nobody put a clipping path around it. And for those of you who are taking Photoshop or have taken Photoshop, you know what I'm talking about. And for those who don't, suffice it to say that it is a wrap that goes around the image and indicates where the edge of the active area is. A little bit like what we're doing with this text wrap. You know how we see this line going around, this little force field. That's a little bit like a clipping path or an alpha channel. InDesign can recognize alpha channels and clipping paths from Photoshop. But lots of images out there do not have a clipping path, and this is one of them. So when I click on this and I say wrap around the image, often if it says bounding box, so even though I've told InDesign to wrap around the image shape, it's not recognizing it because the contour options say bounding box. And that's the bounding box of the Photoshop file. I can change that to say, well, is there an alpha channel? There shouldn't be an alpha channel, so I don't know why this works, but anyway, so much for that. Let's take a look at graphic frame. Same thing. Typically, if an image does not have an alpha channel or a clipping path, you can choose detect edges. And when you do that, often InDesign can be pretty smart about it and say, well, I see a drastic difference between the color I'm seeing at the edge of this image and everything else in the bounding box. This would not work for this image with the palm trees because I have all this blue and I have the waves and the sand. So there's no way for me to tell it to wrap just around the palm trees unless someone had created a clipping path within Photoshop. And in this case, because the nose is so thin and the tail is so thin, this is really not looking too good. So maybe I'll move this image over. And this might be another case where I want it to be the largest area. And maybe in this case I might even shrink this a little bit. All right. Now I have to laugh because this is the one that did not have an alpha channel, and I took the time to take this one into Photoshop, and I did put an alpha channel around this. Let's just see what happens with this one. Yeah, same as clipping. All right, I need to pull one of these over, and hopefully all these that I brought in here, one of these will not have an alpha channel built into it somehow. Let's see how this is just a little pile of tea. I know I've used this one before, and I'm going to wrap around the contour, and this one is working fine as well. And the reason it's working fine is not because it has an alpha channel, but because it was set by default to wrap around, to detect those edges, so it'll wrap around the object. And this particular image has a white background, so it was very easy for InDesign to distinguish what's the image and what's the background. And I think it's remembering what I did, so I should try to import. I'm wondering if I can import that image again, because what I want to show you is, and maybe I'll just go ahead and place it here and you guys can just take note of this. If detect edges does not work, you choose this option, you click on wrap around contour, wrap around that object shape, and it's still wrapping around the bounding box. You still have another option. You can go up to the object menu and you can choose clipping path options. And when you do, you get a dialog box that looks very similar to the choices that we see down here on our contour options. And in this case, I can see that this image did not have an alpha channel. It does not have a Photoshop path or a user modified path. And I know that because all three of these are grayed out. So the only option I have is none, which if I do that, you can see that I lose that nice wrap around the outer edges. Even though it sees where those edges are, it's not going to give me the wrap. Or I have the option of detect edges. And that's what it's trying to do here. There are several other options in here as well. So if you've got a problem like we do in this bottom right-hand corner, I have some pixels that are coming from that Photoshop image, and so it thinks it should wrap around this. And I really don't want it to. So we can play with some of these, the tolerance and the threshold, to choose fewer of those pixels, though it is still not. There we go. Almost. So I can see that those pixels that were over here are now gone, though the wrap is still there. And I may even have to go in and delete some of these by hand. All right, if I click OK, my T is getting wrapped around. I think I might change my option here to, again, largest area. You'll see that that becomes a real popular item for wrapping. And move this over slightly. Okay. Yeah, see that little tiny piece of T down here is what's causing the problem. So let me show you something here. The wrap that forces a text away, the little force field, is made up of a vector Bezier curve. And as we know from what we've learned already about Bezier curves, and let me just draw a little curve here, right? A Bezier curve is made up of anchor points and paths, little segments that connect the anchor points. That is exactly what we are seeing here. We just have to really zoom in to see it. So here's the wrap that's been set up automatically. And if I wanted this wrap to come in slightly, I could go into my direct selection tool, hover over one of these little anchor points, and I could drag it to shorten this wrap. It is painstakingly time-consuming, and as you can see, very tedious. But if you have a very special wrap that you want to bring just one little area in, or you want to push another area out, or you've got one word that's slipping in and you want to remove it, for example, this is getting very close to the D in dancing, and it may be that I want this image to go up slightly. And when it does, this little piece of T is going to push that out of the way. So I might need to go back, drag this down so that that text can jump back over to the other side. Unfortunately, if you go back and change your wrap in your text wrap options, and of course now it's completely ignoring me because I made that modification. Typically, when you go back in to change this, you lose all of your custom modifications. So be very careful that when you make these little tiny changes to the wrap, you do it at the very end of the process, because you'll lose it if you go back and say, oh, you know what, this should have been 6 points of a wrap rather than 8 points. Yeah, that's definitely trying to hang on to that. As you can see, it said user modified path, and it's really trying to keep me from losing that, which I appreciate. So I have to clear it by clicking on another option and then go back in, and you can see that I've lost that change. I want to show you another option. For those of you who might be involved in technical writing, let me move this out of the way here, and I'm going to move these out as well. And I'm going to convert this circle image here to a rectangle. And I'm just going to simulate an image that a technical writer would put in. Let's say this is the picture of a machine, or it's a screen capture telling someone how to do something. In these cases, we typically have an image that goes most of the way across the screen. And even if it doesn't go across the screen, you definitely don't want that text coming up and sneaking up here on the right. So this is where we typically use this wrap option, which essentially is jump over the text. And then you can modify the top and the bottom so that you never run the risk of that text, one word slipping up over here or several words over here. Though this works great, I would not recommend it for a long book. And the reason for that is if I add text as a technical writer, which happens all the time, and I hit return, notice that the image is staying where it is and the text is moving around it. And that's not what you would want in a technical documentation. You would want the image to move with the text because that's where you're talking about the text. So we will learn about a way to anchor images to a text point so that as the text moves through the document, the image will flow with it. And that's called an anchored frame, and we will get to that when we talk more about text boxes. The last option I want to go over that's part of the text wrap panel is you can choose to get to the image and then it has to continue on the next column or the next page. I don't use this very often, but when I have used it, it's usually because it was a 2-column format. I'm just going to quickly change this to a 2-column format so you guys can see this. And I had something, let's say here. And I didn't want any more text to show up below this. It was too far down the page. So instead of choosing jump over, I chose the one to jump to the next column or next page. All right. I want to show you another way that we can get around this. And I don't suggest this as a typical way to use text wrap, but I want you to know that there is an option. Hang on, actually, let me go to Lab 2. I think that's where I have the image. Nope, Lab 1. Oh, maybe it is Lab 2. Sorry about that, you guys. There we go. All right. I'm going to drag this text box, make a copy of it by holding down my Alt key. And then I'm going to drag this image of the sheep over here. And I already have text wrap around the contour, which I really don't want. I don't want any text wrap on this image. I'm going to increase its size, bring it all the way up here. All right, let's say that you want your text to wrap around the center area that just has this large sheep, a little sheep, and the two ducks. Well, that's not going to happen if I just click on the image and choose text wrap, because the moment I click on any text wrap, it's going to push it completely out of the text box because there's no room for that text to appear. So what I can do is get rid of the text wrap for this and this image, and then create a see-through image, a transparent image, to create my own custom wrap. An example of that would be to go over here to this ellipse tool, and I'm going to hold down my Alt key so that I can draw from the center. And the default of this, hang on, I want to change that. There we go. So I'm going to draw this oval, bring it down to where I think I like the position of how it is going just around the sheep and the ducks. Maybe I need to close this up a little bit. And now this object is sitting on top of the text, and the text is sitting on top of the image of the green background. Because I don't want this green background to cause the wrap, I want this oval to create that wrap. And I click on Wrap Around Contour. I get rid of my stroke by making this no stroke. And then when I go into preview mode, you can see that it has pushed the text out of the way. For those of you who are Illustrator students, you have an even, trying to grab just this guy here. You have another option. You could use the pen tool if you wanted to, and you could draw a custom shape. So I'm just going to draw a shape around. And I'm doing this really quickly, so please excuse how bad this is going to look. And I can wrap around that contour. And of course it looks pretty bad because I would need to smooth things out here. But you can see that it's not an oval, it's a more organic shape, though it looks pretty bad. But you can see that you could customize some sort of a wrap which would allow you to do something that the photo itself would never allow you to do unless you created the same clipping path inside of Photoshop. And for those of you who don't know Photoshop, or you're not a real power user in Photoshop, that might be a little difficult for you to do. So you could simulate it in InDesign. I'm just kind of moving this down here out of the way. There we go, a little bit better. When you have an image that goes behind text, we do this, and when we want to use that image more as either a texture, because putting text over an image really confuses the message often, and that's why in advertising you don't see this very often. I just had this happen with a client where they put this really active picture and they wanted all this text to go in front. It looked awful. You couldn't focus on the image or the text because your eye wanted to try to start making sense of the text, and then the moment your eyes focused on the text, it was trying to make sense of the image. So if you just flip through a magazine to full page ads, you'll learn a lot about the techniques for using images inside of a layout. Typically, if the picture is the message, then there's very little text, because the story is about the image. It's not really about the text. The text is just going to be the whipped cream on the ice cream, okay, or the sundae. But the sundae is really the story. And on the other side, if you have quite a bit of text that you're trying to convey to somebody, the message is in the text, then if you're going to use an image, it has to be for color, for to try to make it more interesting. So you're either going to have to screen this back to, like a 15% screen where it's not so dark, not so detailed, or it's because you are placing a word across the page that is screened back that's saying that this is either confidential or copyrighted or something to that effect. And this is very typical in the technical writing industry. You put a watermark across the back that the text goes over the top of, so that if anybody copies that page, it's very clear that they are doing this either illegally or that this is not for distribution, and all of you have seen examples of this. And that's where you would put an image behind, and then you would say no text wrap, just like I've done with this image here. All right. I want to go over one more thing in this demo file before I go to our lab. This is a special case where I wanted a text box that went underneath it. Typically, you draw the text box and you group it. And I'm going to work my way backwards through this. I'm going to ungroup it. And notice that the text box does not have any text wrap applied to it. And the image at this point doesn't either, because the group was what I applied the text wrap to. InDesign has gotten much smarter. If you group a text box with an image, usually you don't have to do what I'm going to show you right now. It understands that it needs to be part of that outer shape. But let me take you back just in case you have a previous version, and just so you understand how these mechanics are working in the background. I'm going to apply a wrap around this image, just like I did before. And I'm going to add that wrap to the bottom. At the moment it touches that text box, can you see how from Classroom in a Book is pushing its way out? And then finally it just says, okay, you've pushed me so far, I can't fit in my text box anymore. So how in the world am I going to get this text to show up and have the wrap go around it so that it creates enough space so that this text is not too close to the call out or byline, whatever you want to call it? I could increase this wrap all the way beyond this, okay? And then I can select the text box that's in the way, and I can access this command by right-clicking and going to text frame options. I can go to the object menu and choose text frame options, either one. Though I typically prefer right-clicking. I think the contextual menus are much faster. And there's a little checkbox right here, ignore text wrap. So now the wrap around this image is no longer forcing this text out of its text box. Now let me back out of this again. Actually, let me just remove this text wrap altogether. Now let me do this a different way. I have my image, and just in case anyone doesn't know how I got this little text box, I took my type tool, I drew a really small text box, and I placed in there from, oops, my caps lock is on, in a book, selected it all, brought the size way down to something more appropriate for a call out or a caption. Maybe I'm going to center the text by clicking on my centered alignment. Grab my selection tool over here, and this is exactly how I got this text box. All right, so I positioned it in the place that I thought was going to look the best. I wanted a little bit of space between from Classroom in a Book and the image. And now I'm going to click on the image, shift-click on the little caption box, and I'm going to go to the object menu and choose group, because I want these two to move together as a unit. I don't want them to get separated if I accidentally move one of them. All right, so I move this, the caption goes with it. All right, now it's time to apply the text wrap. So I click on my text wrap bounding box, and without even adjusting anything, notice that it has allow this text box to not be impacted by it. So I'm going to increase, whoops, I want to increase the left side. And this may not always work. You may have to play around with it a little bit and see your distance. Let's see, I wanted that to be 6 and I'm looking around at other things. Here we go. All right. So adding a caption. And the reason I bring this up is because in your lab for this week, you are going to have to place a caption in the bottom left-hand corner of your rasterized image. If you use the image from the link that I provided everybody, then you're going to have to put this exact copyright. And how do you find that copyright? In the instructions it tells you to click on the image, go to your links panel, and in the bottom information, which is the metadata, which is the non-printable information about an image, and remember in our links panel, and of course now Confer is acting the way it has been. It's just not letting these things appear. Remember, we can move this bar to allow more knew it was going to do that. Sorry. You can see the refresh is really bad. Oh, I hope it hangs on a little bit longer. But anyway, underneath copyright, we see copyright, Eric. I don't even know how to pronounce that last name, but it's from dreamstime.com. So that is what you're going to need to place. And if this image is forcing the text wrap around here, it's also going to push the text out of this little tiny text box. So what we just talked about is going to apply directly to this particular page. I wanted to show you this in the pieces that it's in because you're seeing it in the sample in a preview mode, which looks really nice. This was designed by Cindy Reese, the previous InDesign instructor. And you can see how she's used the descender on each one of these to form a little pocket for tourism program. It's a really nice layout. But if you look at it in pieces, you can see that she had to build this separately. So this, as we saw in the previous webcast, is one piece of this. The S is yet another piece. And then tourism program is another piece. And each piece is a separate text box that has different type attributes applied to it. And I want to put this together from scratch over here just very quickly without it taking too long. So you're going to have a blank page, right? And you can either pull this text in from some tourist site. Every town, I think every location has some sort of tourist site that will give you a few paragraphs about that particular community. When I was doing the webcast and I showed the Hoover Dam project, I just pulled that from the Hoover Dam project information site. And if you can't find it there, you'll probably be able to find something from Wikipedia. So it's going to be about 3 paragraphs. And you can draw that text box. I'm going to delete this one for the moment. But you can draw that text box with either the type tool, and then you can just go ahead and import the text that I gave you or copy and paste whatever it is you want from Wikipedia. So let's just say that I copy this, I place it, my cursor here, and I paste. And my text flows into here. And then I want you to do something with the formatting. Now I would wait to format it until after you have forced your wrap around it. And the reason I say that is the wrap is going to push text out of the box. For example, I've got quite a bit of white space here. But when I bring my sheep over here, you can see now the text box is too small to hold all of it. So you're going to need to play with this a little bit. You're going to need to play around with the relationship between these two boxes. If I want it to be this high on the page, I'm going to have to lengthen this, or I'm going to have to make my type smaller. Maybe instead of this being Adobe Jensen, I'm going to select it all by pressing either Control A or Command A, and I'm going to choose Adobe Garamond. Let's try this one. And you can see that Adobe Garamond for the exact same size type is slightly bigger. So I've got to make some decisions here. Is this going to be a little bit wider so that I can get it to fit? Is it going to have to be wider and longer? And I definitely don't like this. This is a great example of a widow-orphan situation. I want to make another comment too. I do not want to see any labs where the wrap is right at the break between two paragraphs, because you can simulate that with multiple text boxes, and you could turn in a lab that would look exactly like you used text wrap and you didn't even use the feature. You could have drawn a text box that goes here, and then you could have drawn another text box that goes here. So I want to make sure that I see a paragraph getting cut. And what I mean by that is I want to see some of the lines of the paragraph in part of the wrap and the rest of the lines in another part. And of course that's breaking in a really bad spot, and it's driving me nuts. Let me move this down a little bit. All right. You can also use a frame. And remember that a frame can be turned into a text box just by clicking on the Type tool, clicking in that frame, and then pasting your text or placing your text. And we haven't placed text before, but if you choose to use that text file that I sent with your cursor blinking in this text box with your Type tool, and this is typically not how we import text. We usually are in our selection tool. I can go to my File menu, select Place, go to my Sonoma text, and these are the files that are in that Lab 6 items in case you decide to use them. And when I click Open, and it's telling me I have a missing font because the original text is in Times, and I don't even have Times on my machine. I click OK. And don't worry, and of course it gives you your pink background telling you that you do not have this font in your machine. But I can quickly just click, use Control A or Command A, change the font to something that I'm happy with. Let me bring that down a little. And then I just expand that text box to what I want. And you can see that that's going to work just fine. I also want to see a text box that has designed by you. I would like a website that indicates where you got the information, or where you can find more information at about this particular location. And of course, if you do use the class files that I gave the link for, please use the www.sonomacounty.com. But I'm really hoping that some of you are going to find someplace special. From some of the labs that have already been sent in, it's so obvious that everybody has places that they love to go, and I have absolutely been intrigued by the homework. I'm having such a good time looking over the pictures, and everybody seems to have some pretty awesome interests. You can choose to cut up the title any way you want. In this particular case, and I just started playing with this, I really didn't get very far with it. I just wanted to show you some alternatives here. So in this case, the Y is separate from the M, and it's separate from the word destination. So I created 3 different text boxes. Tourism program would be nice, or some other byline that is appropriate for something else. In this case, I created a text box that went up the side of the image. I don't care how you want to lay it out. But the important thing is that page 1 and page 2 don't look anything alike to a certain degree. I'm going to go ahead and click on Demo 2, get rid of this, and you can see that Cindy's page has a very drastically different look. And let me again change my display performance to higher quality. You are not going to see a vector image look good at all until you go to high display performance, because a vector image is going to be made of PostScript, and the high display performance is the only thing that's going to enable this on-screen PostScript. I would rather that you didn't have to, I mean you can build it from scratch, but what I would suggest you do is you take what you did from the first page, just do a drag select across everything, copy it, go to your new page, paste it, and then change it. And that way you're not recreating all of the text frames. What you're doing is you're changing the formatting for all of them. And you can see how drastically different this is. The title looks very different from the previous page. The website's in a completely different location. Designed by is in a different location. And this image on the second page has to be a vector image. For those of you who are taking Illustrator right now, a really fun thing to do is to take a photograph, crop out part of it so that it's no longer a square, because I really would rather not have a square on this page. I want some organic shape. And then convert it to a vector image within Photoshop. Photoshop has a great tracing feature. And if you're taking Illustrator, you can do the same thing. You can take a photo and you can trace it. You may not be far enough into the semester to know how to do that, but it's pretty straightforward if you wanted to just go to help. And of course this is not required at all. This is just something that you might find kind of fun. Otherwise, if you were trying to find a vector image, sometimes I think those are a little bit harder to find. So if you can't find one, I am more than happy to have you have your own location. Go ahead and grab a photo, one of your photos if you want. And if you can't find a vector image for the second page, I'm perfectly fine with you putting in this wine bottle that is part of the assets that I gave you the link for. And even if it doesn't go at all with your second page, I don't care. That's fine. I don't want you guys spinning your wheels trying to find a vector image if you can't get one quickly. There are probably several free ones on the Dreamtime site and some of the other picture sites. But again, if you can't find something that you're happy with, just go ahead and use this one here. All right. Are there any? Oh yes, I know. Isn't that a beautiful script font? This is a font that Cindy got free. Montague script. I think this came free with CS5 if I'm not mistaken. It's really a pretty one. There are several script fonts that come usually free. In fact, I was going through and kind of checking some of mine that I've gotten free from Adobe with different packages. I think Edwardian Script was one, Kflish, and I don't know if that's how everybody pronounces it, but I know that's been around for a really long time. Where is that? Where is that? Kflish, CA. No, I don't see it here. Oh, here it is right here. That's a real nice one, though it doesn't have the really beautiful ascenders and descenders that you see in this Montague. The other one that is pretty popular and has been around a long time is Brush Script, though it has a much heavier feel to it because it looks more like a paintbrush. But just look through what you've got. I was just looking at a brand new laptop that somebody had, and I was looking at the default fonts that were provided. And if it's not an open type font, I don't care. If you're looking for a script font that might be a default font on your system, just go through and see what you have. And we're not doing large quantities of text in something like this type of a display font. So whatever you have, I'm sure it will convert to PDF if it was a default font on your system. And if you are downloading that from a website, I know we've had lots of discussions about free fonts, and if you find that it is not working embedded in the PDF, after you lay it out, if you want to, you can use that option of tracing the font. So remember, you click on the text box, you go to the type menu, and you choose Create Outlines. I never recommend this for large quantities of type, but if there's a typeface that you can't get to embed and you're talking about 2 words or maybe another couple words at the bottom, that's a great way to get something to attach to a PDF, to embed it into a PDF. Okay, I'm trying to think if there's anything else on this lab that anybody might need to know. How do you guys feel about the text wrap? Does everybody feel pretty comfortable? They understand what it's doing and the fact that we are applying this to an image? Okay. I see one smiley face. I see another one. Okay, great. All right, thank you, you guys. I appreciate that. All right, we've gone, this has been a long lecture, but I really wanted to be sure that I got all of these points taken care of. I am leaving first thing in the morning. I have to go out of state for several days. I won't be back until next Tuesday. So I know I sent an email out letting people know that the lectures may be late, but I will send out an email notifying everybody of that. If that's the case, I'm hoping I can record while I'm out of state and using my cell phone. I did a test today and we'll see how that turns up. I will be checking email. So if any of you have any questions before next Tuesday, please feel free to submit them and I'll try to get back to you over the next few days. I'll be in a car for probably 12 hours tomorrow, but starting Saturday I will be able to check email. All right, if there aren't any other questions, homework, yes. So labs 1 through 4 should be submitted no later than tonight. 1 and 2 were officially due on Sunday night. 3 and 4 are officially due tonight at midnight. Those people who have talked to me individually, whatever we discussed is still in place for our discussion, so don't worry. And then going forward, I think I said Lab 5 was going to be due Sunday night, and then the Lab 6, this is a 2-week lab. So you're given 2 weeks to do this one. I think this is probably going to be the longest lab you've done so far, and I want everyone to have plenty of time. So I think this one, I think I posted on in this instruction for this lab, it gives due dates at the bottom. So please refer to those, and I will also send out an email when I post this lecture tonight with homework due dates going forward up through this lab, Lab 6. Again, if anyone has any problems, please see me. I am crushed to find that so many people are getting behind and then they're dropping the class and they're just losing that opportunity. And I've tried so hard to make this easy for you guys to get the homework done and be able to stay with the class, because I hate for you to drop it just because you're getting behind in homework. It's just such a fun program, and once you get into it, I know everyone's going to really enjoy working with it. Okay, so practice, practice, practice. Everybody, please, do we get out of jail tonight once? Yeah, you do. Everybody gets one get out of jail. So I know that Cindy did this in her last class. If you have a difficulty, I don't care whether it's the flu, it's a problem with your computer, I am going to make sure that everybody gets one lab that, I don't care what the reason is, you can turn it in late and you just tell me that it's your one get out of jail. Okay? All right. And if you are really stressing out, and please contact me and let's have a discussion about this, because if you feel that this isn't the class for you and the webcasts are just not meeting your need, that's one thing entirely, and I hope you will send me some feedback on that. But if it's just because you're getting behind in homework, let's see if we can figure something out so that you can get caught up and continue for the rest of the semester. You've invested a lot to be here this far. I hate for anyone to give up at this point. Okay, any other questions? Yeah, exactly. It's just fun now going forward, and it's going to get more fun. Okay, everybody have a great weekend, and send me your questions and post your comments on the blog. It has been great having people participating there. All right, bye everyone. Thank you.